My name is Audrey Thompson. I'm 30 years old, a single mom, and last Saturday, I watched my older brother slap my 6-year-old daughter across the face at our family reunion. The sound of his hand connecting with her skin was so sharp it silenced the room. My daughter Lily was wearing her favorite green dress with little gold butterflies she'd picked it out herself. She spun for me that morning, asking, "Do I look brave, Mommy?" And there she was, hours later, eyes wide with shock. Her cheek red, trying not to cry in front of the people she still called family. And when I turned to my father for some kind of reaction, something he just scoffed and said, "She needs to learn shame." And everyone just went back to their damn meatloaf. Before I tell you how I got to this point and what I did after, I want to say this. If you've ever been the black sheep of your family, if you've ever been talked over, looked through, or written off like, "Your pain doesn't matter," I see you. This story is for you. I didn't grow up planning revenge. I grew up planning escape. I was the second child born 2 years after my brother Derek, who could do no wrong. From the time we were kids, Derek was golden. Straight A's all-star baseball teacher's pet. I was the one who colored outside the lines and asked too many questions. My parents weren't cruel exactly, just indifferent. Unless I screwed up. Then suddenly, their attention laser-focused on me, like punishment was their way of parenting. I remember once in 3rd grade, I got caught passing a note in class, and they grounded me for 2 weeks. Derek got suspended for fighting, and somehow got a new bike out of it. That was the rhythm. Him reward, me reprimand. By the time I was in high school, I figured out that silence was safer than explanation. I stopped trying to defend myself. I focused on school, kept my head down, and when I got into college for communications, I moved across the state and never looked back. That distance saved me, or so I thought. But distance means nothing when you have a child, because then suddenly they want to reconnect. When Lily was born, I was 24, freshly divorced, and working 2 part-time jobs. Her father left 3 weeks after she was born. Said he wasn't cut out for all this pressure. You know what I believed him? Because I was raised to believe people leave when you're inconvenient. So I never asked him for anything. I just hustled. I worked nights, slept when Lily napped, and kept my world small. My dad called on Lily's first birthday. He said he wanted to be involved, that he missed me, that he wanted to be a grandpa. I wanted to believe him. I wanted Lily to have grandparents to know that kind of love. So we started doing short visits. Park picnics, Sunday lunches, harmless stuff. And for a while it seemed okay. Derek was around too with his wife Natalie, and their twin boys Carter and Chase. They always showed up polished perfect like an ad for happy families. Natalie would say things like, "You're so brave doing this all alone," which somehow never sounded like a compliment. I knew where I stood in that family. Still, I swallowed it for Lily's sake. I told myself she deserved to know her roots, even if some of those roots were rotten. The reunion last weekend was the first time we'd all been together in nearly 5 years. It was held at the old family property, this big craftsman house my great-grandfather built. The kind of place with creaky floors, too many rooms, and memories you can't quite scrub out. Uncle Paul had decided to make it a big deal this year, said he was filming a legacy documentary for the grandkids. He had cameras set up in the living room, mics clipped to shirt collars, and old photo albums spread across the dining table. I should have trusted my gut. The whole thing felt staged, but Lily was excited. She wore that green dress and asked me if she could show her butterfly sketchbook to Grandpa. I said yes. She walked up to my father and Derek, with it open, all proud. I was across the room talking to Paul about how he was going to edit the footage. I heard her say, "Look what I made, Grandpa." And then Derek said something like, "You shouldn't interrupt adults, kid." And she tried to explain. And then it happened. His hand, her face. My whole body froze for a second like my brain short-circuited. Then I rushed across the room, scooped her up. She was crying silently, trembling, still clutching her sketchbook. My voice cracked as I asked, "Did you just hit my daughter?" Derek didn't flinch. "She was being rude," he said, like it was a parking ticket. I looked at my father. He just shook his head and muttered, "She needs to learn some manners." And the rest of them. My mother turned away. Natalie blinked. Uncle Paul lowered his camera. No one said a word, no apology, no shame. I looked at Lily and I said, "We're leaving." And Derek had the audacity to laugh. There she goes again, always playing the victim. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a fit. But something in me cracked. And once something cracks, it doesn't go back to the same shape. I walked out of that house with Lily in my arms and fire in my chest. And I knew this wouldn't end here. Not this time. When I got home, I ran Lily a bath and tried to smile, tried to make it normal. She looked at me and said, "Did I do something bad?" And I lied. I said, "No, baby. Some grown-ups just forget how to be kind." But that night when she fell asleep, I sat on the edge of my bed and opened my laptop. I remembered something. Paul had left a mic running. He was filming everything, and I remembered how he clipped one to Derek earlier. I texted him. Just 5 words. "You kept the audio right." It took him 10 minutes to respond. I did. Why? I stared at that message for a long time. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't just about anger. It's about clarity. It's about knowing the moment someone went too far and deciding you won't let it happen again. What if I told you that footage didn't just catch the slap? What if it also caught my father laughing about it after saying, "Well, now she knows better," in a tone that suggested approval? What if it caught my mom saying, "Audrey's always been too sensitive"? What if I told you I had proof of years of abuse hidden in one 36-minute file? That night, I didn't sleep. I downloaded every backup Paul had uploaded to the shared family drive. No one checks it. It's for archival purposes, supposedly. I made copies. I watched it all. And then I began to write, not just a letter, a timeline, dates, incidents, comments. I pulled old emails, texts, screenshots from the family group chat. Times when they belittled me, ignored Lily, minimized everything. I organized it all into a file. Titled it, "The Forgotten Daughter, an Archive." The next day I called a friend from college, who now works in child advocacy law. I asked her, "What happens if I report emotional and physical harm done by family to a child even if it wasn't constant? Even if it was only one incident caught on tape?" She said, "If you have proof and it shows a pattern or condoning of violence, it's enough to trigger an investigation." I asked her, "What if I want it to be the public?" And she paused, then said, "Are you ready for that kind of fallout? Because this won't just burn a bridge. It'll explode it." I said that bridge led to nowhere good, and that's where this part of the story ends, with me staring down the first domino finger, ready to flick. But what happens next? What happens when truth meets legacy, when the scapegoat picks up a mic of her own? Well, that's where it really gets interesting. When you grow up being gaslit, you start to doubt your instincts. But that night, as I watched the footage again, my brother's hand slicing through the air, the sharp sound of impact, the stunned silence and my father's awful chuckle, I didn't feel doubt. I felt clarity, cold, clean, like ice water in the veins. For once, I wasn't second-guessing myself. I was planning. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from Natalie, Derek's wife, and a long text from my mother that started with, "We're worried about you." The kind of message that reads more like, "We're worried you'll embarrass us." I didn't respond. I had bigger things to do. First, I called Paul. I didn't beat around the bush. "I need everything you filmed, all of it, not just the documentary cuts, the raw files." He hesitated. "Audrey, you're not thinking of—" "I'm thinking exactly of that," I said. "You clipped a mic on Derek. You filmed Dad laughing. You got audio of Mom blaming me. And you caught Lily on camera being slapped." Paul went quiet. Then he whispered, "Check your inbox in 20. The folder was titled Footage Dump, Raw. And buried within subfolders labeled Living Room Backyard Interviews and Drone B-roll, I found everything I needed. The slap was there, but also something more damning, a casual conversation later that evening. Derek, beer in hand, bragging to a cousin about how soft kids are these days, and sometimes you gotta show 'em who's boss. But the most gut-wrenching was a clip from the back patio. My father tipsy and unaware of the lav mic, still live, talking to my uncle. Audrey always was dramatic. She needs this. A wake-up call. Maybe now she'll finally toughen that girl up. I sat frozen, hearing how normal they made it sound. How justified. There was no shame, no regret. Just this generational callousness passed down like a family recipe. That's when I decided it wasn't just about Lily. This was about every child they'd conditioned, every woman they'd silenced, every scapegoat they'd trained to keep her mouth shut. I wasn't going to shut up anymore. That night, I messaged someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Marcy, my former roommate from college, who now ran a community journalism site and podcast focused on family systems and emotional abuse. We weren't close anymore, but she was fair, smart, and relentless when it came to uncovering truth. I need to meet you, I wrote. It's big. Family, legacy, abuse. I have proof. She called me 5 minutes later. Is this about your dad? She asked. I exhaled. It's about all of them. Where my place? Tomorrow. When Marcy showed up, she brought coffee and a recorder. I brought footage documents, journals, text logs, Lily's pediatrician's notes from 2 years ago when she suddenly stopped talking in preschool because she'd been yelled at by Grandpa for asking dumb questions. It had all felt random before, but laid out now, it was a map, a pattern. We watched the video together. She didn't say a word during it, but when it ended, she looked at me and said, "Do you want to stay anonymous?" I shook my head. I want people to know it's me, and I want them to know I'm not afraid anymore. 3 days later, the podcast episode dropped. Title, The Slap Nobody Saw Except the Camera. Names were changed, faces were blurred. But not for long, because while I was giving Marcy the receipts, I was also feeding copies of the footage to someone else, Natalie. I sent her an anonymous email with a link to the raw file, along with a note that said, "If you care about your sons, you'll watch this. Then ask yourself what kind of man you're married to." 12 hours later, she called me from a blocked number. Her voice was shaking. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Would you have believed me?" She went quiet. Then she said, "You're not wrong. I've been blind, but no more." Natalie took the twins and left Derek 2 days later. And that's when the dominoes really started to fall. Because Paul, turns out, he was more than a passive filmmaker. He had his own score to settle. Turns out my dad cheated him out of his share of the family business 20 years ago. Paul had played loyal ever since, but he'd been collecting things, quietly, patiently. He called me that night. "You woke the hornet's nest, Audrey. I want in. In on what I asked. Exposure," he said. Legacy truth. "I want people to know what this family really is." "Then let's blow the roof off," I said. And blow it off we did. With Marcy's help, we put together a documentary, short edited from Paul's footage and narrated by me. Nothing exploitative, just truth, clean and clear. My voice sang, "My name is Audrey Thompson. I was born into a family that taught me love had to be earned. That pain was discipline. That silence was loyalty. But I'm done being quiet." We uploaded it to YouTube under the title, The Forgotten Daughter, Breaking the Cycle. It hit 50,000 views in 2 days. I didn't expect it to go viral, but I think maybe the reason it did is because I'm not the only one. There are so many of us women, sons, partners who were raised on shame and told it was tradition, who grew up with bruises called life lessons and trauma dressed as family values. I started getting emails, hundreds, people telling their own stories. Teachers who'd suspected something but hadn't been sure. Cousins who remembered things differently now. Even a former employee of my father who said he was fired after trying to intervene when Dad yelled at me at age 15. Suddenly, the house of cards was collapsing. Derek tried to play victim, claimed it was an edited smear job. But then Natalie went public too with photos, with her own timeline, with her own truth. "Paul," he released the full, unedited footage to back me up. My parents tried to hold a family meeting to discuss the drama. I declined. They begged me to think of Lily. I already was. I didn't want revenge for revenge's sake. I wanted safety, for my daughter, for myself, and maybe if we were lucky for anyone else like us. And yet even after all that, there was one thread still loose. Lily. One night after dinner, she came up to me while I was folding laundry. She was holding that same green dress with the gold butterflies. It still had a faint crease on the side from where she'd clutched it that day. "Can I wear this again sometime?" she asked. "Or is it a bad dress now?" My throat tightened. I knelt beside her. "Baby, the dress is beautiful. You're beautiful. What happened that day wasn't your fault. And it wasn't the dress. It was people who forgot how to be kind." She thought for a moment. "Okay. Then I want to wear it when I sing in the school recital. I nodded, tears stinging behind my eyes. You do that, and I'll be right in the front row. Because what they didn't know, what they never understood, is that the strongest thing a woman can do after being told she's too sensitive, too dramatic, too much, is to feel everything speak anyway and raise a daughter who never doubts her voice. And I was just getting started. The morning after the documentary went viral, my doorbell rang at 7:12 a.m. I was still in my robe, clutching a mug of coffee I hadn't even sipped yet. Lily was asleep upstairs, curled up next to her stuffed dinosaur, like the world was still soft. I opened the door slowly and found my mother standing there, hair curled, coat buttoned tight, jaw clenched like she was trying not to break into pieces. She didn't even say hello, just walked in like she owned the place and turned around in the foyer, eyes darting like she was inspecting for damage. I said nothing. I didn't offer her coffee. I didn't ask her to sit. I just waited. "You've humiliated us," she said. "No, good morning. So how is Lily?" I told the truth, I replied. She shook her head, actually scoffed. That wasn't truth. That was theater. Paul always had a flair for the dramatic. "You watched your granddaughter get slapped," I said, my voice calm. "On camera. And you did nothing. You turned away. And now you're upset people finally saw what we've lived through. You're blowing this out of proportion," she snapped. It was one moment. One moment I stepped closer. Do you know how many one moments there were? You don't even know because you never paid attention. She blinked like I'd slapped her, and for the first time in my life I didn't care. I didn't backpedal. I didn't soften the blow. I let it land. She took a breath and lowered her voice. "We're family, Audrey. Families don't do this to each other." I stared at her, and something cracked in me, not like before when pain erupted. This was a cold break. A clean fracture. "No," I said. Families don't slap children. Families don't protect abusers. Families don't silence the one person who tried to stop it. Whatever we are, it isn't family. She left without another word. And I knew walking out that door she was mourning something. But not me. She was mourning her reputation, her image. And it wasn't my job to hold that up anymore. 2 days later, I got served. A cease and desist letter, hand-delivered, from Derek's lawyer. Apparently, he was claiming defamation, emotional distress, and invasion of privacy. I read it once then, again then laughed, actually laughed out loud, because the irony was so thick I could have bottled it. He assaults a child, and I get sued for telling people that's the system, right? Loud women get punished. Quiet abusers get promotions. I took the letter to Marcy. She read it with a lawyer friend, and then said, "He's bluffing. He wants you scared." "Good," I said. "Then I'll give him something to really be scared about." That week, I launched a private online archive password protected. I called it The Record. It held all the audio files, video segments, transcripts, statements from other family members who started reaching out quietly. Some anonymous, some brave enough to sign their names. And then I shared it with the school board. Not to get Derek fired, he wasn't even a teacher, but to document what kind of home environment his kids were being raised in. For their sake. For Natalie's, for accountability. The board responded by initiating an internal review into Carter and Chase's recent behavioral flags. Apparently, both boys had been involved in bullying incidents over the last semester, stuff the school hadn't tied together before. But now it all connected. Meanwhile, the public side of things kept unfolding. I started getting interview requests from parenting blogs, advocacy groups, even a regional newspaper. I turned most of them down. This wasn't about going viral. It was about reclaiming a voice I'd spent a lifetime being punished for using. But one email caught my eye. It was from a woman named Dana, a middle school art teacher from a nearby city. Her message read, "Your story woke something in me. My mom used to say I was too much growing up, and now I have a daughter who whispers instead of sings. I didn't realize I was passing it down." Thank you. That message stopped me cold. Because that was it. That was the thing. Cycles don't always continue through violence. Sometimes they continue through silence. Through what we normalize. Through what we don't question, because it's all we ever knew. Around that time, Lily came home with a school assignment, write about a hero in your life. I braced myself. I figured she'd write about her music teacher or our neighbor, the one who always gives out popsicles in the summer. But she wrote about me. Her little handwriting, uneven and sweet, read, "My mom is my hero because she says no when something feels wrong." She helps people tell the truth. She makes me feel safe. I cried in the bathroom so she wouldn't see me, because God knows I didn't always feel safe, not growing up, not even now. Every time I opened an email or checked the mail, part of me braced for more backlash. A threat, a lawsuit, another sibling trying to guilt me into silence. But I'd made a choice, not just to speak, but to stay standing at once I did. That weekend, Paul hosted a live-streamed Q&A about the documentary. Over 15,000 people tuned in. He talked about our family, yes, but also about the bigger picture, about how legacy can become a cage, about how silence protects the wrong people, about what it means to be a bystander for decades and finally say no more. He ended with something that stuck with me. He said, "We don't owe loyalty to patterns that hurt us. Blood is not a contract." And I thought maybe Paul isn't just my uncle. Maybe he's a survivor too. But with every spotlight comes shadows. One night, about a month after the documentary dropped, I came home to find a handwritten note shoved under my door. It said, "You're tearing this family apart. Stop before it's too late." No signature, no return address, just that. I didn't tell Lily, I didn't tell Marcy, but I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with the lights off and one hand wrapped around my pepper spray. My mind spinning, wondering which cousin, which aunt, which neighbor felt bold enough to threaten me in my own home. Because here's the truth. No one tells you when you speak up. Not everyone claps. Some people get angry. Some people get scared. Some people lose their power and they don't go quietly. But I wasn't about to go quiet either. The next day, I went to the police and filed a report. They couldn't do much without proof, but at least it was on record. Then I installed a security camera and changed the locks. Not because I thought someone would come for me physically, but because emotional war deserves physical boundaries too. And while I was at it, I wrote something new. A piece for a parenting magazine called "How to Raise a Child Who Doesn't Apologize for Existing." It wasn't about revenge. It was about repair. About how to model boundaries. About how to undo generations of guilt. About how I was still learning, but Lily was already teaching me. The piece got shared 100,000 times in a week. And then out of nowhere, I got an email from Derek. Just one line. "You'll regret this." No hello, no acknowledgement, no apology, just a threat. But here's the twist Derek didn't see coming. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. Because I had already lost the family I'd spent my life trying to please. And in losing them, I found myself. I found a community of women and men who had their own tapes, their own secrets, their own green dresses with gold butterflies locked away in closets full of shame. And we were all starting to open the doors. What happens when the black sheep becomes the whistleblower? What happens when silence becomes signal? That's what I was about to find out. Because an invitation just arrived in the mail from Ridgeview Elementary PTA. They want me to speak at their family wellness night on resilience, on boundaries, on healing, and maybe, just maybe, on what it means to finally come home, not to a house, but to yourself. When I got the invitation to speak at Ridgeview Elementary's family wellness night, I read it 3 times before I let myself believe it was real. It was printed on school letterhead, addressed directly to me, with a handwritten note at the bottom from the principal. "We believe your voice matters. The community would benefit from hearing it." Part of me wanted to ignore it, just delete the email and keep my head down. I'd made my point, hadn't I? The truth was out. The silence was broken. I had nothing left to prove. But another part of me, the part that had watched Lily cry in the back seat after school, because some kid told her she talked too loud like her mom, that part knew I had to go. Because I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was building something for her. A different legacy, one rooted in voice, not obedience. Still walking back into Ridgeview, through those beige hallways and under those fluorescent lights, felt like stepping into a memory I'd tried to bury. The last time I'd been there was during parent-teacher conferences, back when Lily was in kindergarten. Back when I still flinched every time a teacher used the phrase "spirited" like it was an insult. The event was being held in the multi-purpose room, folding chairs, juice boxes, a DIY sound system. The audience was a mix: teachers, parents, board members, maybe a few curious neighbors. About 70 people in total. Enough to feel real, intimate, but dangerous. Marcy came with me for moral support, sitting in the second row with her signature oversized notepad. She nodded at me like a coach before a big game. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, but I kept my feet planted. The principal introduced me with a few kind words, something about courage and community, and then it was my turn. I stepped up to the mic, adjusted it once, and looked out across the room. I saw some faces shift uncomfortably, others watching with cautious curiosity. I could feel the weight of their expectations, their preconceptions. So I started with this. My name is Audrey Thompson. I'm a mother, a writer, and until recently, I was very quiet. A couple chuckles rippled through the crowd. I let them settle. For most of my life, I was told that quietness was the same as goodness, that keeping peace was more important than telling the truth. I believed that, until I saw my daughter get hurt and realized silence wasn't keeping her safe. It was doing the opposite. I told them what happened. Not the viral version, not the headlines, the real version. What it felt like to grow up invisible. What it meant to be labeled difficult when you were just awake. I talked about the slap, the aftermath, the video. I told them about the emails I'd received, hundreds of them from people who saw their own families in mine. But I didn't stop there. I talked about systems, about how schools often discipline girls like Lily for being too loud, but excuse boys like Derek for being just assertive. I talked about how emotional abuse leaves no bruises and how easy it is to dismiss a child's discomfort as overreaction. And I ended with this. My daughter once asked me if her dress was bad because something bad happened while she was wearing it. And I told her, no. The dress is just a dress. People's actions are what carry shame, not clothes, not words, not voices. That's what I want her to remember. I stepped back from the mic and exhaled like I hadn't been breathing the entire time. The room was silent, then slowly applause. Not polite, not automatic, real. I saw a teacher wiping her eyes. I saw a dad reach for his partner's hand. I saw something shift. After the event, people came up to me. A woman who taught second grade said she'd been using behavior charts that rewarded compliance over creativity and was rethinking everything. A dad admitted he'd used the phrase "man up" with his son last week and felt sick about it now. But the most unexpected moment came when a boy I'd guess around 10 walked up to me alone, holding a juice pouch in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. "Are you the lady from the video?" he asked. I said. He handed me the paper. I drew this. It was a picture of a tree half withered and half blooming. At the bottom, he'd written, "Your voice watered the good side." I bent down so we were eye to eye. "Did you draw this for someone?" He nodded. "For my mom. She says we don't talk about stuff, but maybe we should." I couldn't speak. I just hugged him gently and said, "You're very brave." And just like that, I knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something much bigger than me. But of course, not everyone was clapping. The following week, I got a call from a blocked number. Against my better judgment, I picked up. It was Derek. "Look," he said, his voice tight and flat. "You made your point. You ruined my life. Natalie's filing for full custody. My boss saw the video. I can't even show my face at the grocery store without someone whispering, 'So what now?' You happy?" I waited a beat, then said, "I didn't ruin your life, Derek. You did. You think you're a hero. You're just another bitter single mom with a microphone." My voice was calm when I replied, "Maybe. But my daughter's not scared of you anymore. And that's enough for me." He laughed bitterly. "You've always been so dramatic." I hung up. But here's the twist: that call didn't rattle me. It validated everything. Because people only try to silence you when your voice is doing something. And mine was. Later that month, Paul invited me to a family house clearing. He was selling the old Thompson property and wanted to know if I wanted to retrieve anything before it was gone. Part of me hesitated. That house held so many ghosts, but curiosity won. The place looked smaller than I remembered. The rooms that once loomed over me now felt worn ordinary. Paul met me in the foyer, holding a dusty box. "I found this in the attic," he said. "It's yours." Inside was a stack of old notebooks, my childhood journals. The ones my mom used to tell me were a waste of time. I opened one and saw a poem I'd written when I was 9. It ended with, "I wish I could yell, but my voice is too small. So I write it down so it doesn't feel gone." That 9-year-old version of me, she didn't vanish. She grew up. She found her voice, and she came back to tell the story. As we loaded boxes into my car, Paul turned to me. "You know you changed everything. This family, it's never going to be the same." "Good," I said. It wasn't working. He paused. I just hope you know how strong you are. Even when you were a kid, you had something in you. I smiled, maybe. But it took me 30 years to believe it. And as I pulled away from that old house, I didn't look back. Because some places deserve a final goodbye. Later that night, Lily came into my room holding the green butterfly dress. "Can I wear this tomorrow?" she asked. "Is there something special at school?" She grinned. "It's storytelling day. I want to tell them about the tree that blooms again." My throat tightened. "You mean the one from the picture?" She nodded. "You helped me water mine. Now I can help someone else." I kissed the top of her head. "That's the whole point, baby." And that night, as I lay in bed, I realized I hadn't just fought back. I'd built something, a new story, a new pattern, a new truth. But the past wasn't quite done with me yet, because the next morning, I got an email from a name I hadn't seen in 15 years. My Aunt Jamie. The subject line, "I have something you need to know." The email from Aunt Jamie was short, just 2 sentences. I saw the video. "I believe you. I have something you should know. Something I should have told you years ago." That was it. No pleasantries. No hope you're doing well. Just a cryptic, unfinished sentence dangling like a frayed thread I couldn't stop staring at. Aunt Jamie was my mother's younger sister, the weird one according to family lore. She'd moved to Oregon in her 20s, married some indie filmmaker, got into spiritual retreats, kombucha brewing, that whole thing. I barely remembered her, except from one Thanksgiving in my teens, where she wore an orange scarf and told me quietly, "Don't let them make you small." Back then, I didn't know what she meant. Now I knew exactly what she meant. I replied to her email almost immediately. "What is it, Jamie? I need to know." She responded a few hours later with a date time and Zoom link. No further explanation. I thought about ignoring it, about deleting the message, closing the chapter, but something in my gut said, this isn't just about you anymore. This could be the missing piece. So the next night, after Lily was asleep, I clicked the link. Jamie appeared on screen in a dimly lit kitchen, wrapped in a chunky sweater, glasses perched on her nose, mug of tea in hand. She looked older than I remembered, but softer too. Softer in a way I didn't associate with anyone on my mother's side of the family. She smiled sad and small. "Audrey." "Hi," I said cautiously. I wasn't sure if I should. "No," she cut in gently. "You should. You have every right to be here. I just wish it didn't take this long." I waited. Jamie took a breath, then dove straight in. "I left the family when I was 24 for a reason," she said. "And it wasn't just about freedom or art school or marrying some guy with a ponytail. It was because of your mother, because of how she treated me, and because of something that happened before you were born." The room went quiet on both ends. I felt my stomach twist. "What happened?" I asked. Jamie's hands trembled slightly as she lifted the mug. "Your mom got pregnant in high school, not with you." This was before. She was 16. The baby was born early and died within a few hours. No one outside of immediate family knew. It was buried literally and figuratively. I blinked. I never heard anything about this. "You weren't supposed to," she said. "That pregnancy almost cost them everything. Your grandparents nearly sent her away to one of those homes for troubled girls. But instead they hushed it up, made a deal with the local pastor, faked a summer internship story, and when the baby died, they told her to forget it ever happened. Move on, be grateful, be better." I sat back trying to make sense of it. Jamie continued, her voice soft but firm. "She didn't move on Audrey. She never really healed. She buried it, but it came out sideways in the way she parented you. She couldn't handle softness, neediness, emotional mess. She punished anything that reminded her of who she used to be." I swallowed hard. "You're saying I was her trigger?" Jamie nodded. "You were born when she was already tightly wound. Derek, being the first boy, was her clean slate, her redemption arc. But you cried too loud, asked too many questions, needed too much. You weren't doing anything wrong, but to her, you represented failure, vulnerability. And she hated that in herself, so she shut it down in you. It hit me like a gut punch, not because it was shocking, but because deep down I'd always felt it. I just never had the words, all those times that she rolled her eyes when I cried. The way she said, 'You're just like me,' and that's not a compliment. The sudden mood shifts, the cold withdrawals, the way she let Derek tower over me and never once stepped in. I'd spent years asking what I'd done wrong. Now I had my answer. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Jamie's eyes filled. Because I saw Lily in that video. And I saw you holding her. And I remembered how I used to hold your mom that way before she turned cold. I couldn't save her. But maybe I can help you understand her. Not forgive her, not excuse her, just understand the weight she carried and the damage it caused. There was a long silence between us. My throat ached. I don't hate her, I said quietly. But I'm done protecting her. Jamie nodded. Good. That's the only way the cycle ends. Before we hung up, she added one last thing. There's a box in your grandparents' attic. Old letters. One from your mom to the baby. Your father wanted to burn it. I stopped him. If it's still there, it might help. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about ghosts. Not the kind that haunt houses, but the kind that haunt people. I thought about generational pain, about secrets wrapped in shame, passed down like hand-me-down sweaters that never fit quite right. I thought about the green dress, about how Lily still wore it like armor, about how symbols change depending on what we let them mean. And I made a decision. I emailed Paul the next morning. Do you still have access to Grandpa's attic? We met at the house again that weekend. It was mostly empty, now sold signs on the lawn echoing walls. Paul had the keys for one last walk through. You sure about this? He asked. I nodded. I need to see it for myself. We climbed the narrow attic stairs, ducked under cobwebs, opened crates that smelled like old wood and memory. And after nearly an hour of digging, I found it. A small floral box tucked behind a row of tax files and old Christmas ornaments. Inside were letters, yellowed paper, fading ink. One envelope read, "To my baby girl, June 1979. My hands shook as I opened it. The handwriting was delicate, shaky. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if I'll survive this. But I want you to know I tried. I loved you, even if no one else wanted you here. I did. I'm sorry my body failed you. I hope wherever you are, it's softer than here. I wish I could have kept you safe. Love, Mom." It wasn't signed with my mother's name, just Mom. She'd written it to a daughter she never got to raise, and then turned around and failed the one she did. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I just felt hollow, like grief without a shape. I took the letter home and placed it in a drawer. Not to forget it, but to remind myself pain doesn't justify pain. But it explains it, and understanding isn't the same as reconciling. I still wasn't going back, but I finally stopped asking why she never loved me the way I needed. A week later, I stood outside Lily's school with the letter in my purse and the green dress folded neatly in her backpack. She was walking out with her new best friend Maya, a quiet, serious little girl with big glasses and a soft smile. Lily ran up to me beaming. "Maya's gonna come over next week. Can we paint butterflies?" "Of course," I said. As we walked to the car, she said, "Mom." "Yeah, baby. You know how you say stories are how we make sense of stuff." "Mm-hmm." "Well, what if someone else's story hurts your story?" I stopped. "That's a good question," I said. "Sometimes we have to rewrite our own story, not to erase theirs, but to make room for it." She thought for a second, then smiled. "Okay, can I write mine in sparkly pen?" I laughed. "You can write it in whatever pen you want." That night, after Lily went to sleep, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine and opened my laptop. Marcy had been bugging me to write something new. She said the internet was ready for part 2, but this one wouldn't be about Derek or my mom. It would be about cycles, about silence, about daughters. The title came to me instantly, What My Mother Lost and What I Found. And just as I started typing, an email notification pinged. Another new name, a woman named Clara. Subject line, "I think we're related." Clara's email wasn't long, just enough to stop my breath. "Hi, Audrey. I came across your video after my therapist recommended it. I think we might be related. I was adopted in 1979. My birth certificate lists no father. The mother's name was redacted. But the town, the date, it all lines up. I don't want anything from you, just the truth. Can we talk?" I reread it 5 times before I let myself move. I didn't respond right away. I sat in it, let the possibility sink in, that the baby my mother had, the one Jamie told me about, the one who died, maybe hadn't died at all. Maybe she'd lived, grown, loved, hurt, wondered. The idea was too big to process, and yet, it made something in my chest unlock. What if this wasn't just about breaking a cycle? What if this was about recovering a thread that had never truly been lost? I waited 2 days, then wrote back. Hi, Clara. I don't know the full story, but yes, I believe it's possible. I'd like to talk too, she replied instantly. We set up a Zoom. Clara appeared on my screen in a soft gray hoodie, no makeup, tired eyes that reminded me of mirrors I used to avoid. She looked nothing like me, and yet there was something, a shape in the jaw, the way she tilted her head when she was nervous. Familiar somehow. Hi, I said. Hi, she echoed. There was a long pause before she spoke again. I never thought I'd get an answer. I've had this hole in me my whole life. And when I watched your story, something in me said, that's it. That's the hole. I nodded silent. I'm not asking for family, she continued. I'm not asking for a seat at any table. I just wanted to know if someone else remembers me, or if I was erased. I took a breath. You weren't erased, I said. You were hidden, not by me, but yeah, you were hidden. She looked down. Can I ask you something weird? Of course. Do you think she your mom? Do you think she ever thought about me? I hesitated. I used to think she couldn't feel, but I found something. A letter. She wrote to the baby. She said she wished she could have kept her safe. Clara's eyes shimmered. Then maybe that's enough. And just like that, something shifted again. This wasn't a twist, it was a quiet rewrite. A story I didn't even know I was part of suddenly had a new chapter. I asked her if she wanted to meet, and to my surprise, she said yes. Under one condition, she smiled. You bring the kid in the green butterfly dress. We met at a park halfway between our cities. Lily wore the dress, her choice always, and Clara brought a paper bag of muffins. We sat on a picnic bench, under a canopy of oak trees, letting the afternoon sun do most of the talking. Clara wasn't what I expected. She was a therapist, newly divorced, had 2 cats, and a collection of houseplants she named after Greek goddesses. Lily liked her instantly, called her the nice lady with sparkly earrings. Clara knelt down and said, Your mom's really brave, you know. Lily nodded. She says hard things even when people don't like it. Clara glanced up at me. She's not wrong. We didn't talk about blood that day, or who owed what. We just existed, shared muffins, talked about books, watched Lily chase a squirrel and trip in the grass. And as I sat there, I realized family isn't who shows up for the holidays. It's who shows up when the truth is heavy and still chooses to stay. After that day, I went quiet online. Not because I was hiding, but because I was healing. Quiet like a forest, not like a coffin. I started writing again, short essays about resilience trauma parenting. I got offered a small book deal. I said yes. Not to be famous, just to put something in the world that said we were here. We mattered. Lily started 2nd grade, made 2 new friends, learned how to play ukulele. She wore the butterfly dress once a week now, even when it didn't match. Especially when it didn't match. And one afternoon, she brought home a school project, a family tree. My stomach twisted the way it always did at those assignments. What do you do when roots are tangled? But Lily had solved it in her own way. She drew a garden instead. People as flowers. No hierarchy, just blooms. She labeled them not as mom, dad, aunt, or brother, but as safe, funny, kind, sharp, like a sunflower. And under my name, she wrote, she grew herself. That's when I knew we'd done it. We'd broken the cycle. But stories don't always end with a sunset and closure. Sometimes they end with choices. A few months after meeting Clara, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, slanted cursive. It was from my mother. I saw your book announcement. I read your interviews. I'm not angry though. I wish you'd handled things differently. I'm not writing to apologize. I'm writing to say, I won't be part of your narrative anymore. You've made your point. You've won. I hope you find what you're looking for. It wasn't closure. It wasn't even honest. But it was consistent. She was still trying to control the story, even as it slipped through her hands. I didn't respond. Not because I was cruel, but because healing doesn't always include reunion. Sometimes it includes walking away and meaning it. And then months later, Lily came home from school, sat on the couch, and said something I'll never forget. Mom, do we have to love people just because they're family? I paused. No, baby. We love people who treat us like we matter. Sometimes that's family, sometimes it's not. She nodded slowly. Okay, that helps. I kissed her forehead. You don't owe anyone your peace. And just like that, the story didn't end. It grew roots, sprouted new branches. Paul started a nonprofit to help kids document emotional abuse. Clara and I still email, sometimes just memes, sometimes deep stuff. Jamie flew out and met Lily. They planted sunflowers together. And me, I finally looked in the mirror and saw someone I recognized, someone I built. Not the broken girl trying to earn love, but the woman who loved herself enough to stop begging for scraps, who protected her daughter, who told the truth, who wrote her own damn ending. But if I had to sum it up in one sentence, it'd be this: the story didn't set me free, I did.
Story 2. I'm Nathan Carter, 34, and if you had told me last year that I'd walk away from my entire family without looking back, I would have laughed it off. But betrayal doesn't always arrive with loud fights or dramatic ultimatums. It creeps up quietly hidden under the weight of unspoken expectations until one day it crushes you. For years, I was the steady one, the dependable eldest, the quiet fixer who always stepped in when things fell apart. I had a decent career as a software consultant, not flashy, but comfortable. My car, a 6-year-old Subaru. My apartment, clean, modest. My weekends usually consumed handling someone else's problems. My mother, Vivian, 63, worked part-time at a craft store and loved telling everyone she was semi-retired. My father, Ron, 65, still fancied himself a handyman, though every home project somehow ended up costing triple and needing a bailout. My younger brother, Ryan, 30, was in that perpetual finding himself phase one year, a photographer the next, an amateur brewer. And then there was my sister Jenna, 27, a free spirit in the worst possible sense, always posting yoga poses and mindfulness quotes, while her Venmo balance languished near zero. It didn't happen all at once, this slide into becoming their financial safety net. A couple $100s for Ryan's rent when a client ghosted him. A few hundred more when Jenna's vintage VW broke down for the umpteenth time. My parents' property taxes. When did they stop budgeting for those? I rarely protested. It felt easier to help than to deal with the guilt-laced lectures. "We're family, Nathan," my mother would sigh. "Families support each other." And I did. Quietly, predictably. The one thing I kept sacred, the annual Vermont cabin trip, was different. A slice of wilderness that belonged to my late grandfather where we could unplug and reconnect. When he passed, he left it jointly to my dad and my uncle Caleb, a gruff but dependable figure who always treated me like an adult. Every October, like clockwork, I coordinated this trip. I managed the permits, the repairs, the supplies. I even fronted the annual maintenance fee, $1,500 this year alone. My family didn't lift a finger. They simply showed up. So when Jenna called a last-minute family Zoom in early September, I assumed it was to finalize this year's trip. I was already pulling up my spreadsheet, proud that I'd prepaid the cabin caretaker. But the moment I logged on, I knew something was off. The screen filled with too cheerful faces. Mom sipping wine, Dad chuckling at some inside joke, Ryan lounging like he didn't have a care in the world. And then there was Jenna practically glowing as she waved at someone off-screen. That someone was Kyle, Jenna's new boyfriend. The man boy who made a living as a travel influencer, but mostly seemed to drift between couch surfing and Instagram stories about coffee beans. I'd met him once. He called my hiking boots cute vintage cosplay and asked if there was Uber in the forest. "Nathan," Jenna chirped, interrupting my opening sentence. "Guess what? Kyle is coming with us this year. He's so excited to connect with nature." That phrasing, "coming with us," made me pause. "Okay, cool," I said slowly, still trying to steer the call toward logistics. "So, about the trip dates," Ryan cut in. "Oh yeah, about that," he said, glancing sideways at Mom. "We kind of already left." Silence. "Left," I repeated. Mom cleared her throat, looking everywhere but the camera. "Sweetheart, it all came together really fast. Kyle had a gap in his schedule and it seemed easier this way. More spontaneous, less planning." That word planning hung there like an accusation. "I already paid the caretaker," I said flatly. "I blocked off the week at work. You take things so seriously, Nathan." Dad chuckled. "This was just a chance to let go. Relax." The betrayal didn't feel loud. It felt surgical. They'd gone to the cabin, the one I paid for, organized, and kept up without even telling me. Worse, they brought Kyle. The guy who once asked me if hunting season meant there was a bar crawl in town. I didn't argue. I logged off, staring at the blank screen while a cold, clear realization took shape. They hadn't forgotten me, they'd excluded me. And they didn't even feel guilty. For the next few days, my texts to Ryan went unanswered. Jenna sent a breezy, "Hope you're well," with a selfie from the cabin deck. Mom posted pictures of Kyle chopping wood badly with hashtags like Hermana Nature. That's when it clicked. I had always assumed they leaned on me out of need. But this wasn't need. This was entitlement, expectation. And the final insult, they used my money to fund their spontaneous getaway while treating me like the uptight killjoy they were relieved to leave behind. I poured myself a whiskey that night and opened my laptop not to plead, but to prepare. A spreadsheet glowed back at me every payment, every utility bill, every auto transfer I'd quietly maintained for them. The total, almost $34,000 in 2 years. If they preferred Kyle's easygoing vibes to my intensity, they could have it. By dawn, I was ready to vanish, not in anger, but in quiet resolve. This was no longer about a trip to the cabin. This was about setting myself free. I didn't sleep that night. The glow of my laptop screen reflected in the whiskey glass as I scrolled through every auto payment, every quiet bailout I'd made for years. Each transaction was a symbol of the unspoken deal I'd had with my family. They could ignore me, belittle me, roll their eyes at my planning because they knew I'd still cover the bills. But what happens when you take the support for granted and then decide you don't even want the person behind it? By 3 a.m., I had a plan, a dangerous one, honestly. Cutting off people who rely on you isn't just a financial decision. It's emotional dynamite. I was about to light a match. The first thing I did was call my bank and kill the auto payments I'd set up for my parents' utilities. Gas, electric, water, all back in their names. Then I revoked the automatic tuition payments for Ryan's online creative entrepreneurship program, the one he never seemed to finish. And Jenna's car insurance gone. She could figure out how to keep her yoga instructor lifestyle intact on her own. The emergency credit card I'd given Dad for repairs was next. I froze it mid-billing cycle. No warning. Each click felt both terrifying and liberating, like I was cutting cords that had tethered me to a sinking ship. But it wasn't just about money. This was about symbols, about reclaiming that sacred Vermont cabin, too. I remembered something my grandfather once said when we were sitting by the fireplace. This place isn't for people who just want a vacation. It's for people who respect what it takes to keep it alive. That line hit differently now. Before dawn, I called Uncle Caleb, the one family member who'd always respected me without pretense. They took Kyle up there, Caleb, without even telling me. On my deposit. A pause. They did what? Yeah, I said the words cold but calm. They're sitting in that cabin right now like it's theirs. Caleb let out a low whistle. You want me to come up there with you? No, I said quietly. I need to do this alone. That morning, I packed my old canvas duffel bag, filled the Subaru's tank, and began the 5-hour drive north. The autumn leaves were just starting to turn the kind of gold and crimson that always made me feel small and grounded at the same time. But today, I didn't feel connected to that beauty. I felt like an outsider driving toward a showdown I hadn't asked for, but couldn't avoid. As I drove, I thought about something else my grandfather used to say, a phrase I never understood until now. Respect isn't owed just because you share blood. Simple, but brutal. By the time I reached the gravel path that led to the cabin, I spotted the unmistakable signs that they were there. Ryan's dented Jeep parked sideways across the driveway like he couldn't even be bothered to park properly. Jenna's hatchback plastered with bumper stickers about mindfulness and adventure. And Kyle's car too, a leased SUV that still had the dealer plates on it. I parked quietly and stepped out into the cold mountain air. The sound of laughter carried from the porch. I could see them through the trees, Kyle holding a mug like he was king of the damn woods. Dad laughing at something Kyle said, Jenna sitting cross-legged on the steps as if this was all some Instagram shoot. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to take a slow breath. This was my family. These were the people who'd decided they didn't need me, that I was too intense, too careful, too predictable. And yet they were here using the cabin. I maintained the space. I protected the place that had always been about more than just rustic decor and crackling fires. I didn't barge in. I didn't yell. Instead, I unlocked the maintenance shed around back where the circuit breakers and water main valves were kept and methodically flipped everything off. Electricity gone. Water off. Then I walked quietly to the propane tank and shut that down too. Symbolic. Necessary. When the lights flickered out inside, I heard the confusion ripple immediately. The door swung open, and there was Kyle barefoot and wearing some ridiculous wool sweater. Dude, what the hell he called spotting me by the shed? I stayed calm. Power's off, I said simply. Did you turn it off? He asked, looking utterly baffled. Yes. Why would you do that? By now, the rest of them were crowding onto the porch, staring down at me like I was some lunatic. My father stepped forward. Nathan, what's going on? Why are you here? His voice had that tone disbelief followed by exasperation. Like I was the one ruining their plans. Like I was being difficult again. That's when it clicked for me, fully clicked, not just intellectually but in my gut. I was never going to be appreciated for keeping things afloat. Not once. They didn't respect me because they'd never had to confront what life looked like without me. I stood there a long moment, then looked Dad in the eye. I own 25% of this cabin, I said evenly. His face froze. What? Grandpa amended the deed before he died. Caleb and I each have a quarter stake. You don't get to use this place without me agreeing to it. You could feel the mood shift on that porch. Even Kyle finally stopped posturing. Jenna opened her mouth, but no words came out. Pack up, I said quietly. You're leaving today. And here's the kicker. They didn't even fight me. Not really. Maybe they knew they had no ground to stand on. Maybe they were just embarrassed. But one by one, they began packing. No shouting, no bargaining, just quiet shame. The last thing I did before I locked the cabin behind them was stand alone on the porch for a moment, staring out at the tree line where I used to sit as a kid with Grandpa listening to him talk about respecting nature and yourself. I felt none of the triumph I thought I would feel. No satisfaction. Just clarity. I wasn't done yet. This was just the first step, and as I locked the door and turned back toward my car, I could feel a bigger storm brewing, a confrontation that would cut deeper than shutting off utilities or reclaiming a cabin. I was finally ready to stop being their silent safety net, and I had no intention of ever going back to how things were. The drive back from the cabin was different. I wasn't angry anymore, not the white-hot rage I felt when I first realized they'd excluded me. That had burned out somewhere between shutting off the water and locking the cabin door. What I felt now was cleaner, colder, and almost surgical resolve. For the first time in years, I was operating purely for myself, not to win their approval or keep peace. The entire drive back to Boston was quiet, except for the occasional hum of tires on wet asphalt. I didn't even bother to turn on the radio. My mind was busy drafting a list, not a spreadsheet this time, but something deeper, a mental inventory of every way they had depended on me, every subtle thread they had wrapped around my life under the label of family. Those threads had felt like duty. Now they felt like chains. When I finally got home, I made one last round of phone calls to cancel my parents' cell phone family plan, which I'd been paying for since 2015, to remove myself as guarantor on Ryan's lease, to formally close the joint account I'd set up with Jenna when she couldn't get her own credit card. Each action felt symbolic, like clearing a table after an indulgent but exhausting dinner party. No shouting, no explanations, just finality. Let them figure it out. Let them actually experience what self-reliance feels like, something I had been practicing silently for years while they coasted on my reliability. 2 days later, the texts began. First, Jenna short and syrupy. Hey, so weird thing happened, my phone service got cut off. Do you know anything about that, Miss You? I didn't answer. Then Ryan. Dude, the rental office says my co-signer bailed. Are you messing with me? Still silence. And then Mom predictably ratcheted it up a notch. Nathan, your father and I are very worried. We can't reach Jenna or Ryan either. Did something happen? Please call us. This feels petty and beneath you. Beneath me. The irony almost made me laugh out loud. They didn't even realize they were proving my entire point. Their calm, orderly lives had always depended on me quietly taking care of things so they didn't have to. That evening, I sat in my dim apartment, a glass of bourbon in hand, and thought about that cabin again, not just the building itself, but what it symbolized. When I was a kid, that cabin had been my sanctuary, a place where I felt useful, respected, needed. Grandpa never mocked me for double-checking supplies or planning firewood. He'd called it being prepared. But somewhere along the way, my family took that trait and twisted it into a flaw. I could feel it now. They didn't want a son or a brother who planned, who paid, who protected. They wanted someone they could outsource their responsibility to. And the minute I asked for basic respect, they called me rigid, controlling, cold. But here's the truth that had crystallized since that long drive home. Control wasn't my problem. It was their crutch. And I was done being their crutch. 3 days later, Uncle Caleb called. Unlike the rest of them, he didn't beat around the bush. "They're freaking out," he said flatly. "Your mom called me twice today crying. Jenna says you cut her off. Ryan's blaming you for the lease thing, and your dad, well, he's trying to hold it together, but apparently they got a foreclosure notice on the house." I stayed silent for a beat, then asked, "And you, what do you think, Caleb?" He sighed. "I think you finally did what you should have done a long time ago." "But," he trailed off, "they're asking for a family meeting." The phrase hit me like a slap. A family meeting. Like we were going to sit around the living room with coffee and hash this all out like adults. Like they hadn't replaced me with Kyle on a trip I paid for. Like this was just a misunderstanding and not a deliberate exclusion that exposed years of unspoken resentment. But there was one part of me, a small part, that wanted to see them squirm. That wanted them to sit in a circle and realize that I wasn't going to show up with a checkbook and fix everything anymore. That wanted to hear them say out loud what they really thought about me. So I said yes. "Tell them I'll come," I told Caleb. "But I'm not promising anything. I'm not coming to apologize or make this easy. I'm coming so they can look me in the eye and say what they should have said a long time ago." That Sunday, I pulled into my parents' driveway exactly at 6 p.m. I didn't bother to knock. I stood outside for a moment, taking in the sagging gutters, the peeling paint, the dead flowers in the front garden. The house itself had become a symbol of everything wrong with this family, a facade that used to seem solid but was now showing the cracks I'd been patching for years. Inside, they were all assembled in the living room, awkward and jumpy. Jenna perched on the arm of the sofa, arms crossed defensively. Ryan stared at his phone like he could somehow text his way out of this. Mom sat rigidly on the edge of her chair, her face drawn tight with worry. Dad, surprisingly quiet, stood by the fireplace where so many family photos used to hang, but now sat empty. No Kyle in sight, I noted. Probably bailed the second the utilities got cut. I didn't sit down. "So," I said, my voice quiet but sharp, "this is the part where you explain yourselves." The silence that followed was rich, uncomfortable, heavy. Finally, Mom spoke. "Nathan, we didn't mean to hurt you. We just needed a break from all the rules. You always have rules. Rules like paying bills on time, keeping a roof over your heads, making sure no one's car gets repossessed." I asked. "Yeah, those are tough rules." Dad cleared his throat. "Look, son, this whole thing has gotten out of hand. You've made your point, but it's time to get back to normal. Let's not let this ruin the family." And there it was, the phrase I'd been waiting for, get back to normal. But normal wasn't coming back. Because for the first time in my life, I was finally done patching their leaks, done carrying their weight. The silence that followed was different now. I could feel the power shift, quiet but absolute. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there looking around that room at people who had taken me for granted for far too long. And then I simply said, "You keep saying you want things to go back to normal, but this is normal now. You're going to have to learn how to live without me fixing everything." Their faces fell. It was the first time they truly understood I wasn't bluffing. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. I left the family meeting that night with my shoulders square and my mind clear. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking out weighed down by guilt or the exhausting responsibility of fixing what no one else wanted to address. They had shown me exactly who they were, people more comfortable mocking me behind my back than facing the truth when it was in front of them. And for once, I chose not to carry their discomfort for them. As I drove home, the phrase kept echoing in my head, "This is normal now." It was both a declaration and a warning, and I meant every word of it. But the real test wasn't going to be walking out of that room. It was going to be holding the line when their inevitable fallout hit, and it hit fast. The very next morning, Uncle Caleb called again, not to mediate, but to give me a heads up. "They're panicking," he said bluntly. "Your dad's been on the phone with the bank all morning. Jenna's car insurance lapsed officially as of today, and Ryan got notice that he's being evicted next month. Your mom's calling cousins asking for a short-term loan, but, well, let's just say your family reputation has caught up with her." That last part stung more than I expected. It shouldn't have surprised me Mom had spent years spinning a picture-perfect narrative to outsiders while leaning on me to quietly hold everything together, but hearing that her calls for help were falling flat still felt like a small shock. I wasn't immune to the weight of that collapse. I just refused to let it drag me back in. That evening, as if on cue, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered, and of course it was Jenna. Her voice was light, almost playful, as if pretending nothing had happened would reset the whole dynamic. "Nate, listen," she began, slipping back into the casual nickname she hadn't used in years. I was thinking, maybe I overreacted a little. Maybe we all did. "Let's get coffee, just you and me. We can talk this out." I closed my eyes and took a breath before answering. "Jenna," I said evenly, "you're not calling because you miss me. You're calling because you need something." There was a pause on the line just long enough to confirm the truth she couldn't admit. "Well, it doesn't have to be like that. But it is," I said gently. "Look, I don't hate you. I don't hate any of you. I just finally understand that what we had wasn't family, it was dependency. I don't want to go back to that." Her response was a quiet fine followed by the click of disconnection. I stared at the phone for a long moment afterward, not sad exactly, but exhausted by the emotional labor it took to maintain relationships that were built entirely on what I could provide. That exhaustion gave way to something surprising: freedom. Real freedom, not the kind that comes from just saying no to a phone call or declining a family dinner, but the deeper, cleaner freedom of realizing that I was no longer a character in their story. I was writing my own now. Over the next few weeks, I rebuilt routines around this new version of myself. Small things. At first, I replaced my aging couch, started working out more consistently, spent long weekends reading and hiking, not for anyone else, not because it was a checklist item, but because it gave me peace. I didn't talk about my family to coworkers or friends anymore. When they asked, I just said, "We're not close," and left it at that. No explanations, no defenses, just facts. The cabin stayed empty for that first winter, a conscious choice. I visited twice alone, once to install solar panels and upgrade the locks, a symbolic severance from the era when Dad treated it like an open house, and once just to sit on the porch with a coffee and watch the snowfall. Those quiet mornings felt more real than any holiday gathering we'd ever shared. The place felt different now, still mine, still sacred, but reclaimed in a new way. It wasn't a backdrop for obligation anymore. It was a symbol of boundary and peace. And then one afternoon in early spring, something unexpected happened. Uncle Caleb called, not to plead on anyone's behalf, but with an offer. "I've been thinking," he said, "maybe it's time I sold my quarter share of the cabin. You're the only one who really cares about the place now. I'm not as young as I used to be, and frankly, I'd like to see it cared for properly before I'm too old to come up there at all." His words hit me harder than I expected. Caleb was the only one who'd ever treated me like an equal in the family, the only one who never mocked my spreadsheets or quiet way of being. But his offer was fair, and I understood the subtext he was letting go too. After a moment's pause, I said, "Yeah, let's talk numbers." That night, I poured myself a bourbon, sat at my kitchen table, and started a new spreadsheet. This one wasn't for anyone else. No auto payments, no hidden gifts, no secret sacrifices. Just a simple, deliberate plan for purchasing Caleb's share of the cabin and turning the place into something new. Maybe a retreat, maybe a rental for hikers and writers, maybe just a quiet place where no one's voice but my own and maybe a few birds and wind through the trees would fill the air. I didn't feel the need for revenge anymore. The silence I'd given them was punishment enough, and frankly, it wasn't even about punishment at this point. It was about choosing peace over chaos, reality over pretense, and as I reviewed the numbers, a strange thought crossed my mind. Maybe someday, years from now, I'd invite Ryan or Jenna, or even Mom and Dad up to the cabin, not out of obligation or guilt, but as equals, as people who'd finally learned to stand on their own. Maybe, or maybe not. I didn't need an answer right now. The next morning, I drove up to the cabin again, not to check on repairs or stock firewood or balance anyone else's needs, but just to be there. I sat on that old wooden bench my grandfather built a place that once symbolized tradition and now represented something more radical freedom with boundaries. As the sun set behind the trees, I felt a quiet certainty settle over me. This was the new normal. And for the first time in my life, that felt exactly right.